one of the main obstacles in the path of the New Deal as it proceeded, in Roosevelt's mind, and he had some justification for thinking this, it was the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court, up until that time, a notably conservative body, continued to be through the early New Deal, and the Supreme Court was destroying, Roosevelt thought, his New Deal. And indeed, in nine major cases that reached the Supreme Court involving New Deal legislation, the court ruled against the New Deal in 7 of those 9 cases. Well, Roosevelt was infuriated by this. He believed, well, it was true that the members of the court were quite conservative, and they were also quite old. 6 of the 9 members were 70 or older. So Roosevelt, what could he do about it? I mean, you know, they're lifetime appointments. Unless you killed them, you couldn't do anything about it. I mean, even Roosevelt wouldn't have done that. He was pretty strong leader, but he wasn't going to do that, so he was stuck. At least it seemed like he was stuck. Had to wait for these so-called 9 old men to die off. But now Roosevelt was not the type to wait, so he came up with a plan that was known as the court packing plan. The plan was this, that if Congress would pass this act, what would happen is the President would be empowered to appoint an additional member to the Supreme Court for every member who was 70 or over who would not retire. And at that time, that would have meant a potential membership of the court of 15, because there were 6 over 70. Well, he gave as his reason for this, well, he couldn't come out and say, I want to do this so they'll approve my legislation. He couldn't say that. So what he said was that they were old and they couldn't keep up with their work, needed young blood to keep on schedule. Well, the justices resented that, as you can imagine. As a matter of fact, the charges were untrue. The court was really not behind in its work. It then became apparent that Roosevelt was trying, in the eyes of most people, to, quote, pack the court with people who would uphold his policies. It brought the strongest criticism that he had received up to that point, claiming, many of his opponents claimed he was trying to break down the traditional system of checks and balances and trying to establish a dictatorship by making the judiciary a personal rubber stamp of his New Deal. Well, he went too far, at least the Congress felt, and so for the first time, Congress rejected a Roosevelt initiative. It was the most controversial action on the domestic front that he had encountered, and it seemed that he lost on this, but it turned out they did lose the battle, but it appears that he won the war. That is to say, he didn't get his immediate objective. He couldn't pack the court with additional justices, but what happened was the court seemed to sense it was under pressure, it was under attack, and perhaps it better get more in a line, bring its decisions more in alignment with the prevailing attitudes in the country. And, in other words, it perhaps began to uphold New Deal legislation, which it did. And as time went on, the court became more liberal as some of the older and more conservative justices died, and they were replaced by more progressive justices. And all told, while he was in office, Roosevelt was able to make no fewer than 9 appointments, and in so doing gave a more liberal complexion to the court that it had ever had before. And the court at that point, the court then was beginning to be in the vanguard of progressive movements rather than opposing the liberal innovations. And indeed, the court began by the 1950s was perhaps with the Brown decision and other decisions, the court became one of the more progressive wings of federal government.